Hello and welcome to 4 true creepy southern ghost stories. I hope this video finds everyone having a great day. As many of us are aware, there are hauntings all over the world, but in today's video I want to focus on some of the more interesting ones located in the southern part of the United States. Just as a heads up, I will not be covering the famous Bell Witch in this entry, as I personally feel it deserves it to be its own topic. I also wanted to let everyone know that my work schedule has changed recently. Well, actually I'm finally healed up from my shoulder surgery and I'm going back to work. Due to this, I may sound a bit more tired in the next few videos, as my job is about 2 hours away. But I promise to keep my normal quality and regular uploads. Mammoth Caves. In our first story, we are traveling to Kentucky, where this famous cave system is found near the city of Brownsville in what is known as the Mammoth Cave National Park. While it has a long history of being visited back 12,000 years ago, it officially became a national park on July 1st, 1941. To date, tour groups are regularly taken through specific routes underground, but new tunnels are found quite frequently. It is worth noting that it is also known as the longest cave system in the world. Being how easy it would be to get lost inside, as well as its long history, ghost stories are quite prominent in that location. While the exact number of encounters aren't known, I will go over a few that are quite odd, including one of the most famous tales. According to one guide, during a trip, she was waiting for the group to catch up with everyone, when she saw an old man trailing behind. She states that he was wearing a striped shirt, denim pants, and had suspenders. Moments later, while discussing one of the interesting formations, she looked back and the man was gone, and no one in her group matched the clothes he had been wearing. Later, a rescue team was sent out to try to find this lost person, but nothing was ever found. In another event, during a lantern tour, where groups are led through the caves with old lanterns to simulate how people used to do it, a young girl asked her tour guide, named Charlie Hanyon, about the man who was standing up the path from them. When he looked ahead, he did see a man standing by a rock, wearing clothes resembling a fashion from long ago. While looking at him, he vanished from sight. Later, another group would travel to the same location, where a woman claiming to be a psychic asked if they saw anything strange in that certain location, and particularly seemed interested in the same rocky area that the vanishing man had been seen. One of the most famous stories from 1858 is about a girl named Melissa who had fallen in love with her tutor named Beverly. However, her tutor was more interested in another girl, and this angered Melissa. Being she grew up in the area and knew the caves well, she devised a plan to prank her former love interest. Melissa lured Beverly to the cave with the intentions of a tour, and then once sufficiently inside, she snuck away and left him to find his own way out. Days went by and the man still hadn't found his way out, and Melissa started to feel bad about the prank and searched for him on frequent occasions, but with no luck. Not long after, Melissa fell ill with consumption, now known as tuberculosis, and died not long after. To this day, tour guides have claimed to have heard a girl's voice calling out as if looking for someone, and in one case have heard the ghost of Melissa coughing due to her disease. Many of these reports are during times when groups are not in the caves. Some claim that these instances can be written off due to echoes or hallucinations due to being in the dark, but no one knows for sure. I suggest you look up this location, as there are so many stories like this here, not to mention the very rich history, that would take a whole couple of videos to cover. Maybe I should revisit this in the future. Bellamy Bridge. The Bellamy Bridge was built in 1851 near Marianna, Florida, and was originally constructed of wood, but the crossing was used for travel many years before the bridge was constructed. Later, the wooden bridge would be rebuilt of steel, but it is now more of a landmark since it has been abandoned and left in ill repair. With this bridge comes some fantastic ghost stories that are quite eerie. The most famous one is about a ghost of a woman known as Elizabeth Bellamy. There are many interesting theories about her life and death, but the true story is just as tragic. Elizabeth met and married a young doctor by the name of Samuel in North Carolina. The pair moved to Florida and gave birth to a boy named Alexander. 18 months later, Elizabeth came down with malaria and died at the age of 18 on May 11, 1837. Sadly, only 7 days later, Alexander would suddenly die as well. According to legends, Elizabeth's last words were to her husband, with her saying, "I will love you always and forever. Never will I leave you." Stricken with grief of losing his family, Samuel became an alcoholic and later would commit suicide. Due to how he died, his body was buried in an unmarked grave, as was the tradition of the church at the time for people who took their own lives. Reports as old as the 1890s state that the ghost of Elizabeth can be seen roaming around the bridge, apparently looking for her lost husband. Another story claims that a ghostly carriage with a spirit driver can be seen traveling towards the bridge, but when it returns, the driver no longer has his head. Many believe that this ghost is of a man who in life had an argument with his wife and rode out to the bridge with his young daughter, where he cut her head off with an axe and then cut his own throat. Creepy and macabre, I know. This story alone probably means this video will be demonetized. There are 2 other ghostly encounters on this bridge, where each has its own story, and I invite you to look them up. Lavinia Fisher. With our next story, we find a situation that seems to come straight from a horror movie. A lot of the following story is debated, but the crimes are agreed upon. In the 1800s, John and Lavinia Fisher run a building known as the 6 Mile House in Charleston, South Carolina, where weary travelers frequently could find refuge. However, the Fishers were actually members of a notorious highway gang who attempted to rob many of their guests. Apparently, Lavinia was very beautiful and would use her appearance as a way to lure wealthy men into a back parlor to talk. During these encounters, she would offer the men tea, which was poisoned. After the effects had taken hold, they would be brought to their rooms where they would be killed and relieved of their possessions. According to lore, the Fishers had set up a room where when a lever was pulled, the bed would collapse and drop the victim in a pit, where he would be killed if he hadn't died from the fall, and then robbed. Apparently, one night, a man by the name of John Peoples stopped by in for some rest, and soon became the target of the Fishers' plan. The only catch was that John did not like tea, and when Lavinia wasn't looking, he poured it in a nearby plant. After a while of talking, he grew suspicious of the situation and said he wanted to go to bed. While in his room, he sat in a chair after not being able to sleep, only to hear a loud crash and see his bed collapse into a hole in the floor. Shocked, he ran to his door to ask for help, only to find both Fishers on the other side looking completely puzzled. Mr. Peoples jumped out of a window and ran to the nearest police station to report the attempted crime. It didn't take long for the authorities to find the hidden bodies of people reported as missing on the Fisher property. The couple were jailed in a single room, where they attempted to escape, but due to their rope breaking, it left Lavinia behind, and John allowed himself to be recaptured, not wanting to leave his wife behind. The pair were convicted of highway robbery, oddly enough not murder, and were to be hung. Lavinia figured her sentence wouldn't happen, since it was customary in the South at the time for women not being hung if they were married. The judge knew this and decided John would be hung first, so Lavinia would then be a widow and then could be hung. John claimed he was innocent just before his death, but it was all for naught. Lavinia decided to wear a wedding gown to the gallows, with the assumption that her beauty would cause a man in the crowd to want to marry her, freeing her from her sentence. When this didn't happen, she threw a fit and had to be physically dragged to the noose, all the while spitting out curses. Her final words were, "If you have a message that you want sent to hell, give it to me and I'll carry it." To this day, many claim that she is the United States' first female serial killer in history. The ghost of Lavinia is said to roam about the old Charleston jail, in which pictures have been captured of this occurrence. Tomb of Julia Legare. This is a little bit of a tragic story, especially when factoring in that this wasn't an uncommon occurrence during the time period. In the 1800s, a woman by the name of Julia Legare was visiting her family at Edisto Island, South Carolina. Julia was having a good time until she came down with diphtheria, which is a severe throat infection that causes breathing to be difficult. During this period, the girl fell into a coma and later was pronounced dead by the local physician in 1852. Her body was then transferred to the family's mausoleum. 15 years later, another member of the family passed away, and when they returned to the crypt, they found Julia's body slumped against the door, and scratch marks were embedded in the stone. Sadly, it seemed that Julia wasn't dead when her body was placed in the tomb, but woke up from her coma only to find herself trapped inside the stone vault. Apparently, her breathing and heart rate dropped low enough so that the physician couldn't hear it, and this is why she was assumed to have died. Obviously, being on this list, the story doesn't end here. Once her body was placed in the mausoleum again, the family made frequent visits out of grief, or guilt, of the whole event, even only to find that the door was open, but nothing was disturbed inside. They assumed it hadn't been closed properly, so they shut the door and left. A week later, a clergy member from the nearby church happened to walk by and noticed the door was open again, and made arrangements to have it closed. This event continually seemed to happen, even when at one point heavy chains were put in the door to bar it from opening, and yet it still opened and the chains were broken. Later, a stone slab was placed in front of the door by a crane, and even that was later found to be moved. Finally, the bodies inside the mausoleum were moved to being just buried in the ground, and no door was put on the mausoleum. It soon became speculated that Julia's spirit was angry with how she died and refused to allow doors on the tomb. To this day, people have reported seeing the ghostly figure of a woman walking around the cemetery near the tomb, as well as feeling an odd, unexplainable presence while standing by the stone vault. Apparently, this story has garnered so much attention that it even has its own creepypasta tied to it. So what do you think about the stories you just heard? Many of the locations have so much information about them that I couldn't cover them here, but I greatly suggest you look some of them up yourself. I also wanted to take a moment and mention that last week I had the privilege of being the guest on the channel Haunted Road Media's live stream called Edge of the Rabbit Hole. It was such a great time, and I'll leave a link in it in the description. If you are new to this channel and would like to be notified when I put out new content, then do please click that subscribe button. Also, if you are feeling particularly generous with your clicking, a thumbs up would also be greatly appreciated. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.